get there. And we're live, aren't we? Live.
Hey everyone. So while we're all caught off guard, I wanted to. So when we went out of power, or when we went off the air, Michael was talking about his logic setup, and I wanted to ask you, Michael, do you, since you don't really use a template, but you have the channel strips, instead of the channel strips, sometimes do you just use the project browser on the right side to go into a different project and pluck out an instrument?
He said pluck.
I don't really use the project browser for grabbing instruments unless, for some reason, Logic is crashing and loading a sequence, and I just want to reconstruct all the tracks and kind of rebuild the whole thing.
Oh, we lost Alex, guys. Sorry to interrupt. Want to make sure we're stable before we get too far away. But I guess it doesn't make any difference, Mike. I'm very sorry for the interruption. I just saw that we didn't have Alex here.
I don't have a good sense of how much of my Logic monologue I got out before we lost power.
I say we start over. I think when we lost power, if you guys lost power on my timeline, then we didn't even get to Mike's logic. Jack was still describing things. So it may have dropped out.
We were still live though. The live button was still on for a while, and then
was it?
Yeah, am I right, Jack? I mean, didn't it?
Yeah, I think so. We still at least got most of my spew out. So, Michael, if you wanted to kind of recap, I think that would be fine.
I can just basically start over, and then, at the expense of slightly boring our loyal viewers who are watching this live, and then Kyle, you can edit it so that we don't have the repetition. If that's
we will indeed.
Very well. So what I was saying before Mother Nature took down our show, is that I don't have much of a template per se, and the reason is I do a lot of orchestral emulations which involve very large sample libraries. These huge string libraries that might take 30 seconds to a minute to load one sound, and that's with a solid-state drive. So I don't like to have a lot of stuff in my blank template. I tend to start tabula rasa. And what I do instead to give fast access to instruments is I make lots and lots of Logic channel strips. And these are essentially ways to save presets, but it also carries with it whatever plugins you have. So if you've got your favorite bass and you've got an EQ and compression plugin that you really like, you save the whole kit and caboodle, and when you load it up, you get all that stuff back. You don't get auxiliary assignments. Though subsequently in Logic 10 they introduced patches, which are kind of a meta container that contains everything that channel strips did, and then they add the routing as well. So if you really want to recall everything about a prior setting, you can do it. But since I have so many channel strips already built up over the years, I'm intending to stick with the older system just so I don't have to rebuild everything from scratch. So what channel strips let you do is not only do they let you browse essentially different sounds from within Logic's own interface, meaning you don't have to load up play, you don't have to load contact, you can just kind of grab your sound really quickly right from the browser. It also lets you be agnostic about where different sounds came from. So if I want all my string sounds, maybe I want them in one directory of channel strips, and I don't have to care whether a particular string sound is from Vienna or East-West or whatever. They look identical. They're essentially the same browsing interface. So I don't have to load up play and then dig through all the play directories and grab something. I just have everything together. And it gives you complete flexibility in how you organize things. So you could put your basses together, or you could say metal sounds and put those in a directory. And since channel strips are they're making use of the standard Mac file system, you can copy and duplicate channel strip settings. You don't have to just have them in one place the way that you might in a native browser for a sample library. You can just say, I'm putting all my bass sounds in this directory, and then I'm having another directory that has my heavy metal sounds, which may overlap with your bass sound collection. So whatever your frame of mind is, you can just create another directory with all the instruments that you might use for that particular application. So it's really handy, and I sometimes have a project directory for just the patches I'm using in a particular project, and then like months later I can go back and see what sounds I thought were good ideas for that project and then copy them over to my new project. So even though nothing is memory resident when I load up a template, I can very quickly grab whatever instruments I want, and everything's organized. What I found is that in the heat of a project, I just don't have time to go open up a plugin and dig through all the variations of sounds and decide which ones I like. I just need to have everything sitting there in a quick working directory. What I wish Logic would do to augment the library window, which is where you browse through all the channel strips, is include some kind of rating system, kind of like you have with iTunes, or the way that Core used to have kind of a rating system where you could just quickly put stars next to your favorite sounds so you know what to go to first. That would be really handy. I would love to see the new tags feature, the file system tags that were introduced in Mavericks. How cool would it be to be able to apply tags to channel strips? I guess technically you can do that because channel strip settings are just files on your hard drive, and there's nothing stopping you from tagging them. But since Logic does not, at the moment, read the file system tags, it wouldn't really do anything for you. So that's kind of how I handle ergonomics. That's what I do instead of having a template where everything is built in. I'm starting from scratch, but I have everything nicely organized so I can grab things quickly and just create a new cue as I need it. There are a couple of occasions where I will do a kind of a template in Vienna Ensemble, and I follow the quasi-orthodox practice of having Vienna Ensemble running on the same machine as my host DAW. So I think the way that you would typically use Vienna Ensemble is on another machine, and if we get to our outboard slave-master machine discussion, we can talk about that a little more. But what you can use Vienna Ensemble for, even if you just have one CPU or you just want to use one CPU, is creating a template and just having that be memory resident so that if you quit Logic or load a different cue, you still have your instruments at your beck and call. And that can be very handy with very large sounds. So like Hollywood strings are pretty large, and I've occasionally just thrown them into Vienna Ensemble and let that sit there, even though I'd quit out of Logic or go from cue to cue. It's sort of handy to have those memory resident. So that's the closest I've come to having a template. And I think that's my setup.
Gotcha. Well, as you've been talking, I've been trying to get mine up and running, but it seems to be spinning endlessly. So, Jack, you got any questions you can fill the air with?
Sure. I was wondering about the tag system as well that Mavericks introduced. Haven't really taken advantage of it. But do you also use channel strips for native instruments presets that then themselves do have sort of a star favorite system?
I mean, I do have some native instrument plugins, and I have even some old Core instruments embodied as channel strips. But I think the only way you get to see the native instruments star rating is if you open up their plugin and look at it. So that kind of defeats the purpose. What's cool about channel strips is there's just a handy window in Logic that shows you that browser, and you can assign a key command to it. So you just hit one key, and suddenly you're looking at all your sounds from all your different sample libraries in one interface. So I can't really take the advantage of Native Instruments' own star system, and I'm just going to hope that Apple adds something analogous for channel strips, because then we would have the advantage of refining our search.
Gotcha. Alex, are you back? Nope, I don't think he is.
No, we got yeah, there he goes. Poor Alex is dropping out.
This is like Aliens, the second Alien movie, where all the faces are disappearing one by one as the soldiers die.
Well, I've got Ableton finally up.
So we do have a question in the chat. Matt M was asking Mike if he still uses Logic 9.
Yeah.
No, I'm on the latest and greatest. I just got 10.07, I think, 2 days ago. The interfaces are fairly similar between Logic 9 and 10, Logic 9 and 10, where channel strips are concerned. What Logic 10 brings to the table are the new patches, which are kind of like a container. Patches like it contains a channel strip setting and some other stuff too, like the routing information. And that's the new system, and it has a very similar interface, but Logic keeps the channel strip settings around as well, which is nice for backwards compatibility.
Gotcha.
Forum to see if I answered the question. I'm going to assume I did.
Alrighty, well, so I guess it's my turn to talk about my setup, but I'm trying to get it stabilized. A couple things you guys talked about are features that, well, I'm wondering, one, about comparisons between Logic. What do you call them? What are they called in Logic when you save? Is it a channel strip you're saving all your information into?
Mm-hmm.
They're called channel strip settings because the idea is that you're calling up almost all the information on a given channel strip, all the plugins, basically everything except the routing is what you're getting.
Oh, okay. So in Ableton, we call those racks, I guess, right? Would that be accurate, Jack?
I don't have no idea. I've never used the racks.
Oh, okay. Well,
Everything
then,
I do in Ableton, I build from scratch every time.
well, let's see how fast I can go and make fun of. Oh, I shouldn't put it that way. I'm going to do a screenshot of my Ableton thing here. So here's my template in Ableton, just bare bones. You guys are seeing that?
Yes.
All right. So I've got sections for strings, brass, percussion, wind, synth, and extras. I keep an audio track because you never know if you're just going to need one in a MIDI track. And then within these sections, which it won't let me open because I don't know if you can see this, but the play library is loading for the project that I wanted to show. So in an hour, we'll discuss. It's 58% there. I should probably just abort it at this point, huh? But I don't know how many.
So if that was to open, would that be the stack that you're talking about, where you like have all these child tracks?
That's exactly what it is. So that's a grouping. Apple G is the command I use to group.
Well, I think that's a bit different than what a channel strip is.
Oh, no. No, with channel strips, I'll show you what I'm talking about with racks, what a rack is in Ableton as compared. This is more related to what you were talking about, Jack. We have a parent track and a bunch of child tracks below it. So I've got nothing but a beach ball. So I'll just talk about it. So underneath strings, I've got like 5 string tracks. 2 of them do nothing but house the sampler, contact, and the play sampler. And then the other 5 tracks that are below that, and of course I add to them depending upon how many I need, those are routed into whichever of the samplers I'm going to be using. So if on one track I'm going to be recording some violin stuff, and that violin sample is coming out of a sample library in Contact, then that track is pointing to Contact. And on the second track, if I'm doing some viola stuff that's coming out of a library that's in Play, then that track is actually pointed at my second sampler track underneath each one of these sections. And gosh, I wish I could show it to you. Oh, kabooms! Look at this. All right, so let me get straightened up here. I hope this is useful because you guys power outage and everything. If this ends up being lame, you can just send me hate mail. I'll put it in my jacket of my coat. So, okay, so here's strings. And right here, this top track, which I color code, is just my Contact library. And you can see it down here in the corner. And then this one, this play strings, I don't even know what it is. We're just going to push it. That's play, obviously. And apparently I needed the play engine twice. That means I was planning on using more than 16 tracks. And then down here is first violin, and you can see by its information right here, I don't know if you guys can see, it's pointed at play strings, MIDI channel number 1. And that's how this works. Each one of these tracks is pointed at 2 different things: the host of the samples and the MIDI track that you want it to run on. So if I go back to my play strings here, and this is something that confused me when I was getting started, so I kind of wanted to spend some time to show everybody. Well, I don't want to use play. Forget you. You're gone. I love you, East West. Sorry.
I don't.
There's some things I love about you. Don't take it the wrong way. But your sampler takes an awfully long time to load.
Do you use play multi-temporal?
Yes, I do, and that's why I needed more than 2, because apparently I had maxed out one of my play engines. What is it? 16 channels you can have as a max in play, or is it more? And I just was dumb and created 2 of them.
Out of curiosity, why don't you just instantiate a new play plugin for each sound?
Well, I like because of CPU, because of distributed computing. If I'm hearing your question right, by having a play engine running 1 sound each, then that's sucking up a lot of my memory. If I have one play engine running 16 tracks of MIDI or more, or I think 16 is the most I ever put in there. Then I'm using one sample engine hosting 16 sample tracks. Did that make sense?
It made sense, but I think it's the opposite of true.
Oh, is it?
I think it's much more CPU efficient to use one instance per sound, and I think East-West specifically recommends that, particularly for multi-core machines, because I think you get better core distribution if you're having multiple plugins. You've got one play instance and you're stacking it up with 16 sounds, that's all going to be on the same core no matter what. So the overhead of another play instance is actually very small.
That's good to know.
Yeah, so,
I had no idea.
So yeah, I would suggest doing it the other way.
Yeah, and I will do that. So so don't listen to me, people, when it comes to play. Anyway, so these are this is my string section, and here are the instances of let me make this go away, of whatever. In this particular one, I'm only using a few things from string ensembles. I'm using their blank orchestra and what's this called? Orchestra string runs, which I really love. And so, yeah, so that's my contact setup, and then each one of these is on a separate MIDI track. I'm only saying this in case you don't know. I'm sure you guys already know this, but I got to talk at that level, like, in case you don't know. So, yeah, MIDI channel 1, MIDI channel 2, MIDI channel 3, and then that correlates to MIDI channel 1, 2, and 3 in here somewhere. And then I'm using a bunch of play stuff. And so that example is proliferated, is mirrored for brass and mirrored for percussion and mirrored for synths. Well, that one's a little bit different. This usually is, I reserve this for special VSTs like Alchemy and stuff like that, not a sampler. And extras is usually audio channels where I have to bring something in, like I have to pay my wife to sing. Here she is. And I've got some special harps that I was using, a Uilleann pipe, and I put those in the extras because they weren't related to a sampler. And then this is externals, usually mic'd up things. And yeah, I guess that describes that. So that describes how my setup is grouped into, similarly the way Jack is doing it, obviously, with a parent track, and then these are my parent tracks, and then these are my sub tracks, and then I group them within this whole group. I'm trying to think of something that's useful. Mastering. So, I just have Ozone 5 in here, but if I go to Audio Effects, actually it'll be under my user library, and I go to Presets and Audio Effects and go to Mastering, Audio Effect Rack, Moontech Studios. I have a mastering chain or a rack that I like to use. It's going to load here in just a minute. Now, this is what I think you're talking about, Mike, when you say channel strips. Is this the same, where I have all of these different things? Here is my compressor and dynamics and equalizer and limiter, and the settings that I set them at that I like. Is this the same thing as tracks in Logic?
Sounds like it's comparable, that you've got a kind of a signal chain and a series of plugins, and all their settings are intact. My question is, and I'm not an Ableton guy, are those assigned to a particular track, or is that just sort of an abstract thing that you can route other tracks to?
If I put it on a return, I can route other tracks to it, which is a common practice. If it's something more esoteric to the track, then you can just drop it on that track individually. So it is abstracted from the project, and being that it's this kind of encapsulated thing that you can put anywhere you want, depending upon what you've built.
Yeah, so you could drag like 4 or 5 of those onto one track and just have all of those, whereas in Logic, you can't just add more channel strips to this one track. So it's a bit more flexible, but it's kind of the same principle.
Gotcha.
You can do that with an aux, I guess, in Logic.
Yeah. And what I do like is that I can take anything, say I want to add a ping pong delay, and just drag it over here. Why would I want that on my mastering bus? But let's just do it.
So one question we have in the chat before we go too far is Matt M wants to know, if you could only have one orchestral library, what would it be?
Ooh. Wow.
A live orchestra is the answer.
Specifically, it says library, though.
Mike, I like your answer better.
I would have to go, I guess, with East-West, just because I think they have the best string library right now, and that's kind of the core of what you're doing with a lot of orchestral cues. But it would be a tearful commitment because I'm not that crazy about their brass and some other things I like to get from other libraries. But if you put a gun to my head, that would be my answer.
And also, I know what he means. He's asking, if you were going to produce music that people were going to hear, and you had to use just one orchestral library, which one would you use? But my brain immediately went to, I would use a different one for writing because of CPU usage, and a different one for publishing. But I guess if a gun was held to my head, I would go with Sam's, I guess. And if you wanted something that was quick and easy, and you're an Ableton guy, and this definitely is why my opinion is Sam's, is because they have these essential packs that are pretty good, 1 and 2, for Ableton. That I actually have a few tracks in a game right now where all I used was Essentials 1. It was an amazing experience. I had one MIDI track, and I was writing all this stuff, and it was so convincing that it went into the game. So I got to speak for that one, I guess. Jack, what do you think?
Well, I don't have a big preference, but since I only have one orchestral library, I would say East-West, because I don't really do much orchestral stuff. So my strings are East-West, and my brass is Project Sam, I believe. So whatever the project is that it requires. If it's all brass, I'm going to go with one. If it's all strings, I'm going to go with the other.
Yeah, I was going to bring up So that's a good answer, but again, I don't do. Mike Shapiro is the guy you want to ask on that question. He is the orchestral guru, in my opinion. I am just a hack following in his footsteps.
You're making me blush.
So, blush. Speaking of blush, I'm out of wine. So,
we're staring at your Ableton screen right now, by the way.
I do know that because I was going to bring up my template for sound design. But it's really not any different than this, and I didn't want to go digging through the file structure and then find out it wasn't going to load like we did before. So I'm going to get this to go away and go back to my lovely face. Oh, wait, you don't want that. Hey, look at that. So there is...
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you, Alex.
We can hear you, Alex, yes.
I'm on my iPad now.
Nice.
Desperate measures.
Call for desperate times.
Worded off Godzilla.
I saw
what did I miss?
Nothing. Don't worry about it. We'll start over. And thank you for trying so hard, though, Alex. And I'm sorry about the power outage, everybody. So yeah, so that was an Ableton template on one side from Jack, and a range view from me, and Mike's description of his Logic setup. Although, Mike, I would love to do an episode where we get to see your Logic setup, because I'm just, greedy. And
Mike, I was going to ask one question about your setup, actually. One of the main frustrations that I have with Logic is the amount of customization that I need to do to actually get it feeling comfortable for myself, I guess because I'm used to a completely different paradigm for writing music. But when you have I thought the process that you use with using channel strips to save all of the settings, instruments, effects, does it actually, the default, the way that Logic X comes out of the box, you've got the little gain reduction meter for Logic's built-in compressor, and you've got the Logic's little EQ graph for Logic's built-in EQ. Does the channel strip settings, if you turn some of those things off, like the icon and all of that, does it actually save that in the channel strip settings as well?
Are you talking about the fact that there's a dedicated interface for the built-in EQ on each channel strip, where there's kind of a miniature EQ graphic on the channel strip itself, or are you referring to something else?
In the channel strip, there's a whole, you can turn on and off a whole bunch of stuff in that channel strip, right, in Logic. So you've got little icons and stuff like that.
So there's two things. There's if you're thinking of a channel strip as a horizontal entity that's the beginning of a track, like a main area in Logic, this is the case where visuals would help. But each track has kind of a bunch of knobs and sliders graphically on the screen along the vertical workspace. Is that what you're referring to? Like how there's kind of a built-in hand knob there for convenience?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's more of an interface element. I don't think that state is saved with the channel strip. Our users can correct me if I'm wrong with that.
I think you are wrong. I think it does. So like you have your vertical channel strip, and say you have 4 compressors in those little horizontal boxes in the vertical structure, and you can command click those to disable them. If you were to then save the channel strip as like the top two disabled and the bottom two enabled, and you were to save the channel strip as that, I'm pretty sure if you were to load the channel strip up again, the first two would be disabled and the second two would be enabled.
Well, if that's what Alex is asking, then yes, absolutely, it does save all of that state. That's kind of what channel strips are for, remembering what plugins you have. But I think Alex may have been talking about something that's more of a user interface element, and this is on the horizontal aspect of channel strips. Like there's a dedicated area on the left in Logic that shows you kind of a zoom up on the channel strip here that corresponds to your current track, but the tracks themselves have some interface elements like sliders and knobs and things like that. And I got the sense that that is what Alex was asking about.
No, actually, Jack is correct. I was talking about the different things that come up in the mixer view, so that the actual vertical channel strips.
Yeah, so Logic's channel strips will save everything except routing. And if you want to save routing, you can use the new patch system, which is essentially the same thing. They just started over. And that contains, it's like an enhanced version of the channel strip concept, but it also lets you save the aux routing, so that if you're routed to a particular reverb, rather than having the reverb inline, you're sending it off to an aux and coming back, you can actually save that state, which for me is a little too complicated, but if you like to do that, that's an option too.
What happens if you have a send on a track which you've saved as a channel strip setting, but when you load, what happens if you load that channel strip into a project file that doesn't have that bus set up already?
It's pretty smart about it. It'll carry it along, and I think it'll ask if you want to map it to an existing aux or if you want to create a new one.
Okay.
It'll load up all the goop associated with that aux.
Right,
so
that's neat.
It can get a little bit complicated, but I do believe they thought that problem through.
Because this is actually really useful for me to learn from, because one of the main things that I find very annoying about Logic is sort of like the way that it's set up by default is so far away from how I'd actually want to use it that I remember when I first got it having to sort of sit there for 30, 40 minutes turning everything off. I don't really need icons. I don't really need a little gain reduction meter tied into Logic's compressor plugin because I don't use Logic's compressor plugin. Don't need the EQ thumbnail because I don't use Logic's EQ. If all of that can be just sort of stored in a per strip basis, that sounds really really good.
Yeah, and you can customize Logic and save kind of a template, not from the standpoint of what plugins you have, but the graphic interface. So
yeah, that's what I've done.
You can save a template that has that look that you like, and that is one area where templates might be handy.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing up until now, but just sort of haven't thought of trying actually that per strip, which is a smart idea. So I think Kyle has a screenshot up there of.
Well, I did for a minute to see if it helped. My last project I did, it was surround, and whenever I do surround, I have to go to Logic, and I am a Logic nincompoop. I'll spell that out if you'd like me to. So I was, as you guys were talking about mixer sections, I thought I would try to help by showing this, but perhaps not. It's Logic and me don't get along because our brains don't seem to speak the same language. But this is exactly, Mike, why I want to come buy you lots of lunch and drinks, if that's what it takes to unlock the secrets, and just kind of look at your Logic setup and learn.
We could certainly do an episode. I'm just warning you that my Logic setup is very boring, and what's interesting to me, and also boring to the rest of the world, is the way I've arranged the channel strips to be ergonomically useful. How I've got a set of kind of all strings, I don't care what library, and I'll put them in one place, and all that good stuff, which for me is a huge ergonomic benefit. But it's kind of like it's like using somebody else's toothbrush. Those way you organize your sounds are very personal. I don't know how exciting it would be for anyone else to look at the nuances of my particular setup.
Well, good news, I do not plan to get you drunk enough that I'll use your toothbrush. And also, I spent a short amount of time in William Ross's studio. What an amazing guy that is. He was so kind to me. If he's watching, I've sent him the links to check out the show. So kind to let me come in there and ask 1,000 questions. And he has this beautiful facility in Santa Monica. And he uses Logic. And if you don't know who William Ross is, just look up williamross.com, I think. And he uses Logic, and I asked him just a million questions. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that he'd be kind enough to come on the show and kind of explain to you guys what he was talking to me about. But I know that channel strips were a very important part of his functionality as well, and the hundreds of sound libraries that are out there. He was having his crew just kind of peruse through them and pick what they felt were the best, and then he would just preset these into his channels and just write. I mean, he set up his system so he can come in and write, and I'm so envious of that. But it's William Ross. He's got the opportunity to do that, and he's already paid his dues. So with that, I know we had a power outage. I have no idea what the time stretch is. I really want to talk about distributed DAWs. You guys okay with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll give just a short intro, but this was Mike's topic. I was very happy. The loudest keyboard in the world.
Sorry, no, that's me just rummaging around in this box next to the iPad. Sorry.
Go ahead and type. So I used to have 2 Macs and 2 PCs, and one master Macintosh that was running everything. And it was, at that time, I was pretty much just all East-West. I was really happy when I went Mac Pro and I was able to bring everything in. But as you have so astutely pointed out, Mike, I am using Play incorrectly, and so I think it is really important to talk about this distributed subject so people can learn, myself included, what's the proper way to use some of these plugins and samplers that we're using. So Mike, please take off. Tell us about that. Hey, wait, that's the wrong way to say that. Mike, leave. Get the hell out of here. Mike, please tell us about distributed computing.
Well, all right, so what we're talking about is the question of where do your audio plugins live? Are they on your CPU and your main DAW, or do your sounds live on some other computer that your DAW talks to? And that way, that's what we're talking about by distributed computing. We don't mean multiple processors or any of those other good things that might fall under this label, but we're talking about external hosts for your sounds. And this used to be a very practical way to manage large libraries of sounds and have them at your disposal, just because computers used to not really have the processing power to manage a lot of audio plugins in terms of churning samples, particularly when we started moving to a streaming paradigm where we couldn't really load a sound in memory, so we grab a little bit off the disk and play that, and while you're playing a little bit of a sound, you're loading the next part of the sound. That's a big CPU drain, that's a big hard drive drain. So one way to deal with the limitations that kind of sound presents is to simply get another computer. And these are sometimes called slave machines, and the idea is you just have some kind of host program on your other computer that could take MIDI and would spit out audio, and you'd find a way to bring that audio back into your main CPU, maybe through, it's called MADI. Is that the format for having like 9 digital audio channels at once? I don't know why I said 9, that's completely impractical, but 8 or 12 or some other nice computing number. Or maybe you'd have like SPDIF or some kind of audio return that would get the audio from your other machines and send it back into your host. Or you might have a mixer, you might have a digital mixer, but however you did it, the idea is the sounds live on some other computer. So this used to be very popular, and in fact, if you think back to kind of the dawn of using MIDI, everything was distributed in this way. We would have our sound modules that were outside our computers, and we'd send the MIDI through MIDI cables. And there was, the computer had no contribution to the audio. It was just struggling to deal with raw MIDI data. That's the dark old days. So really, there's been kind of this back and forth between externally mounted sounds and sounds that are part of your host CPU. So the question is this practical today? Now that CPUs are getting much faster, the new Mac Pro, the trash can Mac, you can get it up to 12 cores, and the newest iteration of Logic can make use of all those 12 cores. So the question is, in my mind, is there any real value to having one or more slave machines running your sounds? And I don't I do everything in the box these days, and this is on a 2008 Mac, and I get by, and my trash can is supposed to show up tomorrow, so I'm very excited about that. But a while back in the Giga Studio days, I had two PCs. It was kind of an interracial marriage. I had two PCs, each one running Giga Studio or eventually GBI, and they were doing a lot of the heavy lifting for my Mac, which was mostly dealing with a couple of EXS sounds and just managing the MIDI data. So I did run a system that had some elements of this, and the bigger the composer, the more external slave units they would have. There'd be tales of guys with like 10 Mac Minis, and 5 or 6 might just be their strings, and another 3 or 4 might be brass, and it's kind of like the ultimate template. You've got computers just sitting there ready to run your sounds of a certain kind. So if you've got a big enough library, yeah, you might need to use external slaves. So you just may not have enough CPU power or memory. And there's limitations of hard drives. There's only so many things you can stream off the same hard drive at the same time. And I think if you get down to the level of nerdy hardware that I don't understand, there are issues with the amount of bandwidth you can deal with and getting information off your hard drive. So even if you've got an SSD or a bunch of them, your CPU is going to have a computer aneurysm if you try to overload it with too much information. So I think that at the upper levels there are probably people still running server systems, if nothing else, just so you can have these massive orchestral libraries or other libraries on call all the time, ready to roll. If a machine crashes, just throw it away and throw in another one. And you don't have to worry about loading sounds. You can just have them standing by. So I think for certain heavy-duty usage, it's probably still a practical way to go. Kyle, have you ever worked with kind of out-of-the-box sound hosting or any kind of slave system like this?
Yeah, when I got East-West Platinum Library, the instruction book was like, buy 400 PCs. So I hit up every pawn shop I could find. No, that's an absolute lie. It was 398. But I had to hook them all up, and I was using Cubase at the time, and Cubase had this add-on software that you could download. It was Link something, and I had, gosh, it's been so long. We're really dusting off the cobwebs here, but my audio link was via those RCA-looking cables. You already mentioned it, Mike. What were some of the audio connection cable options? They had an RCA into them.
SPDIF, I think.
Yes, that was it. That's exactly it. It was SPDIF. And so I ran 4 machines. I dedicated each one, 5 machines total, 1 to command everything. Different types of instruments on each one, strings, brass, percussion, as you can see in my template as well. And yeah, SPDIF'd them in. And then, oh gosh, I wish I could remember what Cubase called that. OpenLink or something like that. I don't even know if they have it. I think it's built into the system now, but at the I'm an old, before I switched to Ableton, I used Cubase for a very long time. And so this wasn't a feature, it was an add-on software. I think it's now included. To answer your question, yes, I did do that. But now I'm using a situation where I have hard drives working the same way, or at least in a similar way as the way I had computers. I now have a hard drive that's dedicated to certain libraries, another hard drive that's dedicated to different libraries, and I make sure that they all are 7200 RPM and are running at the top notch. I never put them to sleep. I'm just trying to find information that would be helpful in my brain, so that way they don't have to ramp up when you're in the middle of trying to write something. That's actually been my distributed way, is to take it from computers to hard drives, load them into my machine, which is a Mac Pro, max the crap out of its memory. I think I have 32 gigs of memory in this thing. And so far I've been successful at getting away from having multiple machines. Does that answer the question?
It does. And you outline one of the trade-offs involved, and one is the immediate accessibility of sounds that are hosted on an external machine. Even if you turn off your CPU, your main DAW, and then load up Logic or Ableton or whatever else, those sounds can be sitting there waiting for you. But it also can be an ergonomic pain just in terms of the interface, because your software has to talk to some host software running on those other machines, and another thing I guess nobody's mentioned is that latency can be a big problem.
Yeah.
And you need to have a system that's smart enough to deal with latency from possibly from multiple hosts and to adjust itself to the lowest common denominator so that you don't have one sound coming home faster than another one and curing that difference. So you're only going to be as strong as the weakest link in your system. And if one machine has high latency, the best will make everything have high latency because it'll be slow but at least uniform.
Yeah.
Without which chaos will reign. That said, today's software is really good at figuring out latency and dealing with it. Logic has latency compensation built in. And if you're using Vienna Ensemble Pro for hosting externally, it also is smart enough that your system will magically work out all the things that you don't want to deal with. And I think even if you have multiple instances of Vienna Ensemble Pro, I think your system will adjust to that, and you effectively won't have any differences in latency. So it's nice that it's possible now to have the process be more transparent than it used to be.
Yeah, Matt's got a good question in here. Why don't you freeze tracks? You know, in my template that I was going to bring up, I have one. When I do something, I have a session that I open up and I do all the work in, and then when I know I'm going to master, I duplicate that session and I go into mastering, and then mixing mode, and then that's when I freeze tracks, is because I get them where I want them, freeze them, get it where I want it, freeze it, get it where I want it, freeze it, and then I know that my what's coming out the other end is going to not have one of the things that I was trying to get away from with that technique was pops. I was getting pops because I wasn't freezing enough tracks or whatever, and I didn't feel like going into Isotope RX and cleaning up all the pops. And I started discovering that if I duplicate and then set a track the way I want it to sound and freeze it, then and it seems redundant to do that through the whole process, but I'm a little bit anal that way. I literally do all of them and then I do my mix down, and I got rid of pops and stuff that way. So yeah, I use freezing a lot. I assume you do too, Mike, and everybody. Sorry, I didn't mean to just point out Mike.
Yeah, when I'm pushing my current machine to the limits of its usefulness, I sometimes have to freeze tracks for the same reason you do. You get dropouts and pops and everything. But so that what that does is it works around some of the CPU and maybe memory limitation issues. But if you've got a big queue with lots and lots of sounds, you're still waiting for all those sounds to load if they're embedded within the DAW. And even if you have the same exact sounds in each queue or each instance of music, however you want to term it, when you load it up, you're still waiting for all that stuff to load and repopulate its memory, and that can be a big speed bump in your workflow. And one nice thing about externally hosting sounds is that they're sitting there preloaded all day long, and you don't have to sit and wait a minute to load up that giant string sound or whatever else, or that 10 mic per drum piece drum kit that you've got. That stuff is just ready to roll. And freezing doesn't work around that. That just kind of helps you deal with the brutal beating of your processor and hard drives from having all the sounds.
That's nice. So when you I'm going to be completely weird about this question, but when you are going to work for the day, do you leave these computers on all night, ready to go, and so you can just walk in? Because that's something I'm trying to solve here in my studios. I'm trying to have the one button record moment, where you just flip on a power, everything comes on, and you can just start recording. I kind of want to be a junior Peter Gabriel. I just can't afford the crew to keep everything up and running the whole time. Is that the way you do it? You just leave the machine on, leave the samples and everything ready to roll, and so you just hit one machine, start writing, and there's no delay?
I'm pretty close to that. I do keep my DAW machine on, and typically Logic is there overnight or wherever else, so I'll take the higher electricity bill. But I don't, unless I happen to have a queue that I was working on last night, I may not have anything in Logic's memory. But I will have to load up the sounds. But again, the organization of channel strips, for me, makes it very easy to just grab a sound and go. I don't have to load up play and then look through its particular interface and then deal with contact. So we're now jumping back to our template conversation. But that's pretty handy. When I was using, in the Giga Studio days, when I did have two PCs that were both running Giga Studio / GVI, I did keep those running around the clock too, which meant that all my major sounds were memory resident and ready to go, and I didn't even need to wait for anything to load, which, given how fast machines worked and how quickly Giga Studio loaded its sounds was a kind of a mercy on myself.
Mm-hmm.
I think no matter what we're doing, we all need to cut down on pauses in our workflow because those kill creativity. So if you're working with electronic timbres, you're lucky in that they tend to be low overhead in terms of disk space, and you can load them up very quickly. Particularly if you're just configuring a synth plugin differently, that could be almost instantaneous, and you can jump through different sounds. If you're dealing with big sample libraries at the state of the art today, you need to find some other way to work around that. Maybe buying an SSD, or having some sounds ready in your template, or as we're talking about, externally hosting some of your sound libraries. So you can just sit down and be ready to roll and not have to have an awkward 3 minutes while the sudden flash of inspiration dies from your working memory.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And SSDs, if you're going to do that, you got to have kind of a dedicated SSD to that library because they're not big enough yet, are they? When I looked into them, and I got to admit that's been a while, they were so small it just didn't serve my purpose. I really wanted them to be big, but they're also expensive, very expensive the bigger they get. And so I'm kind of like, well, I don't want to spend that kind of money on something that's only going to hold half of the libraries that I have. So now I got to get 2 of them, and I don't know if that's very useful. Or do I just put it into my main machine so that like I hit a button and boom, I'm up and running, and leave the other stuff running on these the older spin-up hard drives? I don't know. But has SSD gotten to the size and price where it's a reasonable purchase right now?
It's always getting cheaper, and capacities are getting better, and the drives are getting more reliable. It's a fairly young technology. We're not quite in the infancy of the technology anymore, but we're kind of like in the toddlerhood, I guess, the terrible twos. But you can buy, one of the best things you can do with an SSD is use it for your system drive, so that the OS is on it, Logic or Ableton, whatever you're using is on it, and if you have to reboot your system, that's a much faster and less agonizing process.
That's what I do.
What was that, Jack?
That's what I have set up.
Yeah, it's a really smart way to feel like you have a faster machine. So if you're on a budget, get an SSD, just slim down your system drive to whatever you really need, and you can probably get by with 100. You don't even need a terabyte drive for your system drive anymore if you've got your libraries living somewhere else. I tend to triage. Like I have Hollywood Strings on its own SSD, and I think I threw Hollywood Winds on there as well just because I had a little more space. But Hollywood Brass and the other sample libraries I have on conventional hard drives just to save money. And since I don't use those sounds as often and they're not as big, I'm willing to put up with that trade-off.
Another thing I use is a Drobo, and I connect it via FireWire 800, and I get no drops when I'm pulling from I play some strings and all of a sudden they're over there and they've got to come across this wire. But I noticed with FireWire 400, which was an option, or USB, which has a pulsing rate of delivering information, I was getting dropouts. Ultimately, I moved most of my libraries to an internal card system, internal hard drives, but I do have a couple libraries hanging out on my Drobo, and when I switched to 800, just information if you've got some kind of external, which scares me about the trash can Mac, because it doesn't have 800 anymore, I don't think, right? It's all Thunderbolt?
It's all Thunderbolt.
And is Thunderbolt direct, or does it pulse like USB when it's sending data?
I think it's direct.
No, that'd be fine then, because Thunderbolt's going to have a bigger throughput, but anyway, so that's another thought that I had. There was two more questions, and this one I'm curious about as well. Matt M in the chat room asked, does the Play engine have the capabilities of purging unused samples like Contact?
It does. I think, however, someone may want to correct me on this, I think it doesn't remember the purge state. Contact is really smart and remembers exactly what samples you purged and what you didn't. And I think Play has amnesia when you reload the system, so it might be less useful if I'm not completely lying.
And I think Chase was asking, do your hard drives die faster? I'm wondering if he says if SSD hard drives die faster.
SSDs... Go ahead, Jack.
No, go ahead.
I have to figure out what I was saying. SSDs have a shorter lifespan. I think the conventional drives, if you are doing a lot of write operations. So I think every time you write, it's actually... This is kind of half-assed, but I think it can only use the same register or whatever the unit of storage is a certain number of times, and then it has to basically say, I'm done with this part of the drive, I can't use it anymore. This is an approximation of the truth, and I'm sure people who are technically adept are rolling their eyes right now. But the shot is if you use an SSD for read-intensive operations, like streaming samples, you don't have as much of a problem as if you have it for your system drive, where there's going to be a lot of write operations as well.
That's what I answered him in the chat, because that's my understanding of solid-state drives. But actually, Chase was asking, will the drives die faster by leaving them on all the time?
Oh, no. And you know what? I speak as a guy who used to make hard drives. I literally did in Santa Barbara. I used to work at some Micropolis, I think it was called, or something.
Isn't it the most intensive thing that happens to a hard drive is when it's having to spin up and spin down? So if you don't actually spin it up and spin it down, then that gives the least kind of least hit on it. Is that right?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I've also heard that about cars. Like the worst thing you do is start one. And I agree when I have to go to work. Oh. But hard drives, I have found manufacturers. It's really a lemon lot. You know, it's what you get. I think we're at 75% of success rate with hard drives. There are some that I've bought and I keep them on all the time and they die. You hear that little click and you're like, whoa, start moving stuff, which is one of the reasons I kind of got the Drobos, because I have hot swap. I can just pull one out and throw a new one in, whether I'm replacing something that's gone down. One hard drive was bad that was in there that came with the system. And it was from a company I won't mention, but it was a company that I've never bought hard drives from before, and I don't mean to presume that they just make bad hard drives. But I like Seagate hard drives, so I stick with Seagate hard drives, and I've never had a Seagate hard drive go down, and I've, for years, kept hard drives up and running. As a matter of fact, probably the majority of the hard drives that are in my machine right now are at least 6 years old, and I leave this machine on 24/7. I reboot it maybe every couple of days, 3 days. So hopefully that answers the question. I think it's just a luck of the draw, really, and I think that the luck is on our side, really, when it comes to buying those things. So with that, let's call it a show, guys. That was exciting. We had power outages.
Exciting is one word. We had Godzilla in the Pacific, trampling on the cross-Pacific internet line there between Japan and America.
Yes, that's exactly what happened. And I saw that movie on Saturday and just loved it. But if you look around my house, you'll see a lot of Godzilla stuff. I'm a bit of a Godzilla fanboy, so maybe it's unfair to ask me. But if Godzilla wants to knock out our show, I'm all for it. If Mothra wants to take it out, screw that bastard. Or Gadzuki. What was that?
That was the cartoon, right?
Oh yeah, and the kid. Wasn't it the kid dinosaur that used to blow smoke rings?
I have no idea what you guys are talking about.
Young people, Mike. Young people drive me crazy.
We didn't watch Hanna-Barbera the way we watched Hanna-Barbera.
Don't you know? Oh, Jack, you're getting an education. Pull you by the ear, put you in the front room. So with that, I'm going to sign off. Mike, I want to start with you with talking about things you have to promote. You just got back from Chicago, enjoying the awesome performance of one of your concertos, right?
I only have one, so yes, it was the concerto. This is Concerto for Guzheng, which is an instrument we've talked about in the context of sample libraries. It's a Chinese rhythm. And by hook and crook, we got the Chicago Sinfonietta to perform it at Symphony Hall. It was a blast. The room has amazing acoustics, and the orchestra is fantastic. And our soloist, the Guzheng player, is one of the top virtuosos in the world. So you're always having a good experience when you've got an expert representing your music. It's nice to just sit back and know that it's going to be well treated. So that was exciting, and that was my last. That's why I couldn't be on the last show.
Well, congratulations. I wish I could have been there.
It was the best.
That would have been awesome. So let's go to, in reverse order of my windows, Jack, what's going on? What you promoting?
On Designing Sound, we got a pretty cool article up today. It's an interview with Chris Sweetman. He has an interesting interiors, the sound library out, which is pretty cool. He's over in the England, and over there he kind of recorded this small library out of opportunity, and he actually was able to record an old derelict Star Wars sound stages, like from the original movies, and got some pretty cool wind ambiances in there. So That was out today, and on Wednesday I'm going to have a podcast roundup article, which is pretty cool.
Nice.
And
Nice.
completely unrelated to me, in my inbox today, I got this pretty cool email about this thing called Liquid for Massive, which is the first Native Instruments Massive preset library dedicated to water and liquid synthesis. If you
Sorry,
go to
I'm going to have to go.
Bye, Alex.
Sorry.
Bye, Alex. Sorry about that.
See you.
But so yeah, go to snow-audio.com. I have nothing to do with this, but I just wanted to talk about how cool this was. And so it's bubbles, drip soundscapes, liquefied basses, globular effects for Massive. It is just a presets for Massive.
Awesome.
Which is pretty cool, and so check that out. I think it's pretty cheap.
Well, Mike, you are correct. Our illustrious chat room has corrected me. It is Son of Godzilla who does the smoke rings, and Gadzuki was the cartoon. And see, I've watched so much Godzilla, I've merged them together. We don't have anything to promote here. Still looking for audio programmers. We've interviewed a few people, but if you got some stuff out there, you know somebody who's got a resume to send along, please tell them to send it to jobs@moontechstudios.com. Audio programmers, especially those familiar with procedural audio, Max MSP kind of stuff. That'd be awesome. That's all we got, guys. Thanks for living through the Godzilla attack. Thanks.
See you guys next week.
Yeah, let's hang up. Okay, bye. Thanks, chatties. Later.